good time of the day. We've now reached the magic number of 200 participants attending out of some 500 that have registered. Hello to everyone. I would like to welcome you to the webinar of the ABS initiative in collaboration with the International Chamber of Commerce. It is on engaging the private sector in the DSI Multilateral Mechanism and the Cali Fund. And within this webinar, we would like to discuss what's necessary in order to make the fund work and what is also feasible. The ABS initiative, I have to say that, is being supported by the governments of Germany, of Norway, of the Netherlands, of UK and Switzerland, implemented by GIZ, the German International Corporation. Next slide, please. I'm Suhail Al-Janabi, and I'm with the ABS Capacity Development Initiative, and I'd like to walk you briefly through the agenda of today's webinar. After my welcoming remarks, we will have some inputs being provided by the Secretariat of the CBD on the intersessional process until COP17. We will remind us that's going to be done by my friend and colleague Hartmut on the functionality of the Cali Fund and what are the key construction elements and construction sites, building blocks of Decision 16.2. And then also from Daphne Young-Dervé from the International Chamber of Commerce, some preliminary reflections on what are enabling conditions for industry, what do they need to engage further and more intensively in the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund. We will have two panel discussions, one exclusively with the industry participants and members from corporates and from associations. So it's to better understand challenges that industry sees. It's going to be facilitated by Pierre Plessis. And we will then, next slide please, enter into a second panel discussion that looks at solution pathways. And that's a mixed panel with industry representatives, with representatives of parties from North, Global South, and also with some research input from the London School of Economics. The respective names of the panelists will be then shared, and they will be introduced by Pierre as we go. And what is then interesting is that as we will come then to the last part of the webinar, we'll also enter into a more interactive session, and it's going to be closed by Gaute Hansen, the webinar from the Ministry of Climate and Environment of Norway. Next slide, and just some housekeeping rules. As I already said, the chat will be open before the second panel, and you will be invited to also share your ideas on solution pathways for making the multilateral mechanism and the Cali Fund work, so particularly on incentives. Please use the chat. The chat will not be translated, that you can do with respective software, like Google Translate and DeepL. We will screen the chat from the ABS initiative and compile these ideas that we will find there, and then also introduce them to the panelists of the second panel for further discussion and reflecting. Of course, we will probably not be able to make reference to all the ideas that are going to be shared within the chat, and in that regard, they will definitely serve as food for thought for further events and webinars. And finally, for data protection reasons, we cannot provide that the chat is can be copied or saved, but an anonymized, that's quite important, version of the chat will be integrated in the final report of the webinar. So this is about housekeeping, and you will see, of course, then the possibilities to use your language. So it's being translated into French and into Spanish at the button bar below the screen. So let's go to substance. And in that regard, I would like to call upon Tauku Shikonto. He's the head of the ABS unit at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And Tauku, over to you.
Thank you, Suhail, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all, wherever you are. And a great thank you at the onset to the colleagues at the ABS COP Development Initiative, as well as to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as well as the donors who made this event possible. We all know that it has been quite a long journey from Egypt, where decision 14/20 was taken, onwards to Montreal COP15, where decision 59 was taken that agreed that benefits from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources should be shared fairly and equitably. And that also included the establishment of the multilateral mechanism, as well as the associated fund, onwards to Cali, where we had decision 16.2, operationalizing the multilateral mechanism for benefit sharing, including what is now known as the Cali Fund. Let's take a look at this decision 16.2 from Cali. Next slide. Now, that decision had essentially 5 core clusters of activities that has to be carried out intersessionally by the Executive Secretary. And the first block of activities pertains to the submission of views, SYN, by parties and stakeholders. And this has to do with the following: possible additional modalities of the multilateral mechanism, noting that the aeroplane is being built while it's already flying. So there are still modalities that may be have to be considered, as well as possible new tools and models such as databases for making digital sequence information on genetic resources publicly available and accessible in a transparent and accountable manner to all parties. Then there is the second cluster of activities is structured around the commissioning of studies. And there are 3 studies, one on options for making digital sequence information on genetic resources publicly available and accessible in a transparent and accountable manner. And another study is looking at the national and international standards for the identification of small and medium and large entities provided for in the decision. And finally, the third study looks at the contribution rates, including implications for revenue generation and economic competitiveness. The third cluster of activities are around the request to the ES to constitute an ad hoc technical expert group with a mandate to work on the formula for the fair and equitable allocation of the Cali Fund money to developing country parties. And then the fourth cluster is the call for setting up the Cali Fund with a multi-partner trust fund. And the fifth and final cluster is around the setting up of the governance of the multilateral mechanism, including the Cali Fund, which will constitute the convening the meetings of the steering committee, as well as performing secretarial services for the fund and establishing the secretariat. Now, if we move on to the next slide, if we look at the intersessional timeline, we will note that the time after Cali was quite an intense one for the DSI team at the Secretariat, as work already began immediately after Cali with the posting of notifications in December, which served as a follow-up to Decision 16.2 of the Conference of the Parties. Now, that notification provided an overview of the actions that are to be taken by the various stakeholders to give effect to Decision 16.2. And these actions are around the following: the substantive actions by parties and non-parties, as well as others to implement the modalities as set out by the decision. And with regard to the others, that is the users of digital sequence information on genetic resources under the multilateral mechanism, as well as entities operating databases that are dependent on DSI and that make such information publicly available. Then we had the supporting actions by the Secretariat and the United Nations partners, UNEP, UNDP, and this has mostly to do with the setting up the account and the memorandum of understanding between these UN partners. Then there were the procedural actions required by national focal points, representatives of indigenous people and local communities, and relevant organizations that relates to the operationalization of the multilateral mechanism and the intersessional work. And under that, we have two clusters, which is the submissions of nominations for members and observers of the steering committee of the mechanism, as well as nominations for experts for the RTEC on allocation methodology. Then we had called for the submission of views on additional modalities, as I said before, the possible new tools and models, such as the databases, and finally, information on national, regional, and or international standards on thresholds determining small, medium, and large entities. The slide here indicates the work towards COP 17 and the various sort of milestones. We have, of course, if we go backwards or forward, now we have set up the Cali Fund. It was launched in February. Steering committee has been established. The Secretariat of the convention serves as the interim secretariat, and we've got money now that the account is open. We are waiting for contributions to start coming in. Then we have, of course, the activities as I've just outlined, and some of them have to go to SPI 6, and it has now been determined that there most probably will be 2 SPIs. So some of the work that will be ready will go to SPI 6 for consideration and recommendation to the COP, and some goes to SPI 7, and all of that then goes to COP 17, where we will consider the possible additional modalities, review process of the multilateral mechanism, possible tools, and then the RTEC on formula for this disbursement will also then give the report back, and contribution rates and thresholds of the multilateral mechanism. At this point, as you can see, the work has been quite a lot, and I would like to thank the Secretariat, DSI team, and of course the Executive Secretary and of the convention, as well as the UN partners, UNDP and Multi-Partner Trust Fund, as well as UNEP, who have been assisting the team and working around the clock to keep in line with the intersessional demands and requirements of the decision, as well as to those donors who have been supporting this work. Much is the work, short is the time, few the resources. Looming is 2030 and 2050, the vision that we've set out for ourselves. Shall we achieve what we set out to achieve? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tauko, for framing the process and to remind us that there is quite some steam in the kettle. With that, I would like to hand over to Hartmut to remind us actually on what can be built.
Yes, thanks, Zul, and good afternoon from Germany. I like to point out what are the key construction sites to make the Cali Fund functional, and that I think will then also be picked up by the panels later in more detail. So if you can show the second slide, please. Well, as Taco informed us, the modalities of the multilateral system in the Cali funds have been decided, and I think I also would like to remind everybody that the parties to the CBD and main stakeholders like industry and research opted for elaborating on all this through a CBD decision and not through international treaty, with the intention that, of course, the system in principle can be functional right after the decision with some delay, and we don't need to wait for that. First, of course, it was decided that all users of DSI have to share their benefits. That I think was a decision also coming from COP15 with regard to the monetary benefit sharing, which will be the main topic today here. It has been decided that public databases, research, and academic institutions are not expected to make monetary contributions, while certain industries are expected to make these contributions. These users of DSI should be in sectors that directly and indirectly benefit from DSI. And it was decided that thresholds should be introduced to characterize the businesses. And you see down here, there are certain accounting dates, assets, sales, and profits, which should be reached before companies should pay. And they have a choice. They can either pay 1% of their profits or 0.1% of their revenues. That's what was decided mainly on contributors. And the next, please. And I think, yeah, I can go to this one. Then we need to talk about the allocation, because also allocations is very important also for users to contribute to the fund, because of course the money which they contribute should also be spent according to the rules by the CBD. The decision was that it should be allocated in a fair, equitable, transparent, accountable, and gender responsive manner. It will be, after a long discussion, it was decided that the funds go to the parties through direct allocation. So it's not like in the JEF, for example, project-based allocation. And a formula will be determined by COP17 on the distribution of available funds to the different eligible parties. How will the money in the end then be spent by the parties? The decision also suggests that the national entities who then manage these funds may allocate resources on the basis of projects developed through a country-driven or community-driven process. So the project basis to spend the money, of course, then is located in the CBD member states themselves. And I think another very interesting decision is that at least half of the funding should support self-identified needs of IPLCs, including women and youth. That is also something which emanates from earlier decisions, that IPLCs, as the custodians of biodiversity and traditional knowledge, should be, let's say, specifically mentioned as the recipients of this money. The last slide, please. Another important topic is, of course, the governance of the whole multilateral mechanism, and also the Cali Fund, of course. Also, after long and intense discussion, it was decided that authority and guidance and accountability is with the CBD COP. So the COP has, let's say, is heading the whole Multilateral Mechanism, there will be a steering committee established to provide oversight over the operations. The fund is located at the UNDP, that is what Bauke already mentioned. And it, for the time being, it will comprise 24 members, 15 from parties, 7 members from IPLCs, and 2 members from United Nations. These members have to make decisions, and there will be 6 observers also in the steering committee, like 2 from civil society, from scientific institutions, and from the private sector. So that is, in brief and roughly, an overview about key provisions which form the basis for the panel discussion in this webinar. Yes, thank you, Zul. Go the next one.
Yes, thank you, Hartmut, and for reminding us what's in the 16.2 decision. And we wouldn't have that webinar, I think, if everything was sufficiently spelled out, detailed, and self-explanatory. And in this regard, I'm handing now over to Daphne Young-Dervé from the International Chamber of Commerce, who will provide us with some reflections on what it really needs now to encourage industry to contribute to the mechanism, to the Cali Fund. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Suel. Yes, we're really happy to have this opportunity and thank you so much for collaboration with this. For us, it's really important to really to work with everybody. Can we go to the first slide, please? In this exchange, because businesses really want to find solutions and work together with parties and other stakeholders to make sure that the MLM will really work on the ground for everyone. This is a complicated jigsaw, and we all need to work together, and businesses are very keen to do this. We really appreciated the efforts of everybody to work towards a multilateral approach, which we think is a good approach. But as Taiko said, the MLM is still at the initial phase of development. It was constructed offline, I think Taiko mentioned. So there is quite a lot of further work on the current decision to make it workable on the ground. Next slide, please. And why do we need a workable mechanism? It's in everybody's interest, because something workable will facilitate increased and sustainable benefit sharing flows for biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, which everybody wants to contribute to. We also need a workable MLM to make sure that research and innovation is supported. Because again, that was agreed by as an important element for everybody. And as I think many of us know, the current ABS system has quite a few frictions and costs for providers and users, and diverting those costs, which are necessary towards conservation, would be a really very positive thing. So what is workable? Something workable would be, from our perspective, simple, proportionate, and commercially realistic. It would provide legal certainty and a level playing field. Importantly, it should contribute meaningfully to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, as well as support sustainable economic development, including the development of a bio-based economy. So to do this, the MLM needs to have certain enabling conditions from the perspective of companies to engage, as well as stronger incentives. And these incentives should be not just reputational, but beyond. So what are these enabling conditions? Next slide, please. The first one is to have really an option for ABS compliance that's truly multilateral. so that it's an option which is alternative to national systems and not additional. The decision is not terribly clear about this, so companies do need assurance that contributing to the system would give them compliance with national ABS laws. Also, while we realize that the mandate at COP15 was limited to a publicly available DSI, it would be a strong incentive for companies if there was a clear pathway to broaden the scope of the MLM to cover also all the SY as well as genetic resources. The second bucket of conditions really relates to ensuring a level playing field. We realized talking to different people that there is no common understanding on many of the very key terms and concepts in the decision. For instance, entity use, direct versus indirect use, even digital sequence information, indicative rate. There are many terms which are unclear and being interpreted differently. So we really need a common understanding on those, as well as on modalities, to make sure that national measures are not implemented in a divergent way, and also to ensure that all the stakeholders on the ground have clarity on what they're meant to do and what the MLM means. Convergence of national measures would very much help in this regard. And also we would need, for a level playing field, much stronger global incentives, as I mentioned, beyond reputational, so that we can really attract a broad participation from many stakeholders. Next slide, please. The third bucket of conditions really relates to the expectations on benefit sharing. To be commercial, or to be sort of realistic and proportionate for businesses. They feel that it should be aligned with the scope of the MLM currently, which is publicly available DSI, reasonable and proportionate, and this is to avoid putting contributors at a competitive disadvantage to their competitors, and also to encourage the uptake and not hinder the uptake of new technologies. And also continue to encourage continued investment by companies in conservation, which they do already. And then thirdly, also benefit sharing that would take into account the diversity of use of DSI. The fourth bucket is really to avoid any overlapping obligations or payments with national obligations, as well as with other international instruments. And lastly, to have more meaningful and strengthened business participation in the design of the MLM and the governance of the fund. This, we think, that could be helped by fuller and increased representation by business in the governance mechanisms. So I would now, I think my colleagues are now going to go into more detail on these enabling conditions, and I'm happy now to pass the floor to Pierre, who's going to moderate this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. Just before I start this panel, I just want to say that I'm standing in today for Tim Hodges, who was going to moderate, but unfortunately had a bereavement in his family and will be, instead of at the webinar, will be at his father's funeral today. So kindly hold him in your thoughts and prayers. This first panel, as Daphne indicated, is intended to draw out a better understanding of industry's challenges, and it will consist of only representatives from industry. There will not be an opportunity here to engage in the chat. We will save that for the second panel. The idea here is to get a bit of a sectoral perspective from different sectors in industry, also from industry associations. And as a first round, we have asked the panelists to dig a little bit into the particularities of a particular sector and specific challenges related to the sector. Our first panelist is John Hicks. He's the Senior Director of International Trade and Regulatory Affairs at the Personal Care Products Council in the United States of America. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pierre. And thank you to everyone on the call for joining us today. PCPC is the leading trade association representing cosmetics and personal care products companies in the United States. We are a member of a coalition of similar trade associations in the cosmetic sector from around the world that have recently become engaged in the multilateral mechanism on DSI. I would like to read them all. We're quite proud of our large coalition. It includes representation from Australia, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, France, Germany, Japan, Mexico, Peru, Singapore, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and finally, both Europe and Latin America as a whole. We know that biodiversity is essential to our member companies' ability to provide new and top-selling products, and often serves as a rich source for inspiration and innovation in the development of new ingredients. However, our sector shares many of the same concerns that Daphne raised in her remarks, and what I understand will be raised by other sectorial representatives on the panel today. I would like to share with you some of our suggestions on how to address these issues. For the cosmetic sector, legal certainty is of utmost importance. To that end, we strongly encourage the Cali Fund Steering Committee and the COP parties to define DSI. Daphne brought this up as an important critical area of uncertainty. And we believe that DSI should be defined based on only Group 1 and Group 2 as set out by the ad hoc technical expert group. These are the DNA, RNA, and protein chemicals that benefit from DSI in public databases. The identity of the relevant ingredients with actual benefits for cosmetics can be readily determined by our sector because the source of these ingredients that might have benefited from Group 1 or Group 2 is in all cases from DSI. However, the opposite is true for Group 3, the metabolites that benefited from DSI. This is because metabolites can be derived from natural sources without any DSI utilization. Many of these ingredients predate utilization of DSI entirely. The cosmetic sector will not be able to confirm whether a metabolite in a finished product benefited from DSI. Furthermore, and this is very important, when suppliers have sought to source metabolites with DSI utilization, this is done to ensure, or it has the effect, that they no longer harvest these resources from nature, use petroleum-based ingredients or other non-renewable sources. Therefore, failure to define DSI without excluding Group 3 will discourage the sustainable use of biological diversity. As everyone on this call knows, conservation of biological diversity and sustainable use of its components are key objectives of the CBD and the Nagoya Protocol. And for these reasons, we strongly object to the inclusion of Group 3 within the scope. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you very much, John. Our second panelist is Marcus Wiz from DSM Firmenich in Switzerland, where he's the Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs. Marcus, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Pierre, and many thanks for the opportunity to describe our ambitions, needs, and challenges in this space. I will use our company as an example, but what I will describe is representative for the industries we are active in. DSM Firmenich is a business-to-business company that stands at the forefront of innovation in nutrition, health, and beauty. Our company is a leading ingredient producer serving primarily the food, feed, and cosmetic industries. Our product range includes vitamins, flavors and fragrances, colorants, omega-3 fatty acids, enzymes, non-caloric sweeteners, and many more. A large proportion of our product portfolio is still produced by chemical synthesis from petrochemical raw materials or is of mineral origin. And therefore, these products do not involve any use of genetic resources or DSI. But we also rely on extraction from natural sources, for instance, for essential oils, or on biotechnological production. In our innovation activities, we strive to develop the most sustainable solutions for our customers, and biotechnological production plays an important role in this endeavor. In biotechnological production, we use microorganisms with a long history of safe use in the industry, which typically are not bound to ABS obligations. In addition, we may or may not use DSI to genetically modify these microorganisms for a given purpose. However, in the vast majority of the cases, the DSI that we use is either proprietary DSI, or public DSI from countries without ABS obligations. A last point that I would like to mention is that our commercial products do not contain only a single substance or ingredient. A typical product of ours contains multiple, up to hundreds of substances or ingredients. And overall, we use thousands of different materials in both our R&D activities and in commercial production. From this description, you may imagine that ABS represents a formidable administrative effort for us, and that the current modalities of the multilateral benefit sharing mechanism offer very limited value for companies like ours. On top, if undue burden is placed on bio-innovation, this will go against our sustainability ambitions and will delay the transition from fossil-based to renewable raw materials that is crucially required to achieve our climate and biodiversity ambitions. Many thanks.
Thank you, Marcus. Our next speaker, also from Switzerland, is Marco Kur. He works for the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, where he focuses on the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol. Marco, you have the floor.
Great. Thanks a lot, Pierre. Thanks for having me here today. So I wanted to give just a few points in the limited time we have on the biopharmaceutical sectors, a bit of background on kind of how we contribute and some of the challenges that we have. So I think just as a refresher, as a reminder, as a sector, we develop, a lot of different products that benefit society as a whole. Quite obviously, we develop a number of different life-saving treatments and vaccines. Over the, for example, over the last 50 years, 40% of infant deaths have been, we've had a reduction of 40% of infant deaths globally. We also engage in a number of different capacity building initiatives with health systems, medical professionals, etc. I spoke at a non-monetary benefit sharing webinar last year where we highlighted some of these efforts. So I think taking it as a starting point, our sector, and I'm sure it's the same for other sectors, we already contribute a number of different benefits to society, which needs to be recognized. I think one factor that comes through in the decision is that the different sectors that are listed, there are vast differences between the sectors themselves. Us in the pharmaceutical sector, it takes us on average between 10 to 15 years for R&D for new products. And the success rate, once we've already gotten to clinical trial development stage, is only of 10%. And these elements, these differences between sectors are not really taken into account in the decision. And another point which, pulling on what Tauko said, I really like the metaphor. The aeroplane is being built while it's flying. I think the critical question here is we need to convince people to get on this aeroplane while it's being built and while it's flying. And that's difficult to do. And I think there are certain safeguards and certain, in this call, incentives that need to be included. Simply put, there were a number of different criteria listed in decision 15.9 of the CBD, which are not here. We don't see them reflected in the decision for the Cali Fund. In particular, as John said, legal certainty and clarity, not hindering research and innovation, generating more benefits and costs, and for the system to be efficient, feasible, and practical. I don't think these have been recognized in the decision itself. Specifically for us in our sector, we navigate the health world, and here, obviously, the environmental and the biodiversity world. There are currently ongoing negotiations for the WHO pandemic agreement, where there is the potential for significant obligation stacking between the health space and the biodiversity space, let alone with national implementation and national ABS rules. We've got multiple layers where the same company or the same sector can have a plethora of different benefit sharing requirements placed on them. And unfortunately, although the decision to an extent recognizes this, it really doesn't go far enough in proposing solutions for this that need to take place. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco. Our next speaker is from the far side of the world. Thank you very much for staying up late. He is Shivendra Bajaj. He works for the the Asian Pacific Seed Alliance, and it's also active in the International Seed Federation Genetic Resources Coordination Group. Shivendra, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pierre. I guess I'm the only one from representing from Asia region, so I hope I do a good job of representing the region. As Pierre said, I work for Asia Pacific Seed Alliance, that's APSA. APSA, with over 500 members, is the regional seed association comprising of seed companies and seed association within Asia and around the world as well. Our mission is to sustain agriculture through the production and trade of quality seeds for the world. Representing the seed sector, so the seed sector needs a consistent alignment with other DSI mechanisms to assist companies in navigating their obligations. In plant breeding, the seed companies, the researchers use DSI and genetic resource from different species. We use DSI from public database. We use genetic resource from the MLS of the ITPG RFA and from the countries under the Nagoya rules. We also generate DSI from genetic resources. Many companies operate at the global scale and in global markets. That makes it pretty challenging. The biodiversity laws of each countries are unique, and the same GR, genetic resource, or DSI, or the variety developed may be subjected to different regulation, which further complicates the freedom to operate for the companies. Therefore, the seed sector urges the creation of a simpler ABS mechanism. However, under the current proposal, the companies need to be compliant with the multilateral mechanism or any other mutually agreed terms from the provisions of genetic resource or DSI outside the scope of MLM and other multilateral mechanisms such as the ITPG RFA. So it is quite complex for the seed companies to keep track and be compliant in their obligation. In fact, it will be better if some incentives to motivate to contribute to the MLM instead of bilateral laws to cover the payments would be necessary. The seed sector needs a legal certainty and a clear multilateral option for compliance. By contributing to the fund under the MLM should ensure that other mechanisms, be at international or national level, are covered. I'll cover about this in my next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shivendra. Our final panelist is Julia Moreira Pupe. She's with the National Confederation of Industry in Brazil, where she's a policy and industry specialist, and she also coordinates the Industry Biodiversity Network. Julia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be here. CNI is the main organization representing the Brazilian industry with a mission to increase the national industry competitiveness while contributing to the country's sustainable development. CNI have been working with industry, government, and other stakeholders to provide insights to the discussions related to DSI. So CNI really appreciate this opportunity. So firstly, I would like to express my agreements with the concerns raised about the previous intervention. And we stress that further work is needed to refine some mentioned elements. I will complement here with a regional view from Brazilian industries based on what we have been discussing at the national level. So while we recognize the value of the existing approach in the decision 16/2 as a foundation for the MLM, we believe it's important to also consider the nuances of how DSI is used within different industries. And CNI acknowledges the diverse types of DSI utilization and technological maturity levels present within industries. In order to promote and incentivize the use of DSI that generates benefits to be shared, the idea is to think of an approach that includes these different types of use, and we recognize the potential risks inherent in a rigid revenue and profit-based approach. And this approach does not adequately indicate the actual or intensive utilization of DSI across all companies or value chains. In Brazil, for example, sectors are diverse and in terms of extent and purpose of their DSI use. And while the sectoral model provides a starting point, it may not fully capture the varying levels of DSI use across companies. And another challenge that I would like to highlight is related to the classification of entities under the MLM. CNI considers it essential to avoid simplistic approach that classify companies solely based on economic size, such as small, medium, or large. Despite this classification being useful in certain contexts, it may fall short in accurately reflecting companies' real contributory capacity at the international levels, considering diversity in business models, degrees of DSI dependence, and the varied stage of technological and economic development. And lastly, I would like to emphasize that we need to understand the impact of the decision, and the studies that will be developed by the CBD Secretariat will have a key role in a well-defined decision in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Yeah, I want to, before we go, as we transition to the second round, which is about taking the specific challenges mentioned by Daphne and going a bit deeper on them and starting to reflect on what would need to change and how. Just this metaphor of flying the plane while you're building the plane. I think a more appropriate metaphor, maybe my good friend Taco would permit me, is that in fact, we're building the life raft while we're surfing the flood of extinctions that is threatening our global biodiversity. For the second round, to change it up a little bit, and because Shivendra had already previewed it, he has further comments to make. Shivendra, you have the floor.
Okay. Yeah, so in this part, I'd like to explain further what we meant by the need for legal certainty. So the seed industry definitely needs a legal certainty and a clear multilateral option for compliance. By contributing to the fund under the MLM, it should ensure that the other mechanisms, be at international or national level, are covered. So what does it mean? It means that we want contributions to be made to one alternative system that should be acceptable to all governments and deemed compliant to the country's national laws. And allow me to explain further. As I said earlier, many seed companies operate globally. So they could carry out their research in one country or even many countries by accessing DSI and genetic resource from many sources and from many countries. So it becomes extremely complex to determine the proportion of DSI and genetic resource of each country in the finished product, which is a variety. If a single benefit sharing multilateral option, therefore, would be ideal for the companies to be compliant with the obligation, and that single multilateral option should be legally acceptable to all countries. And after that, there should not be any more obligations to the national laws or any other international instruments. To achieve that, a comprehensive awareness initiative is needed for the governments at the country level to engage all relevant stakeholders, including the seed sector, and not just only to remind their obligation of benefit sharing, but also to better understand the scientific and business realities, how DSI and genetic resources are used in different sectors. It is important to ensure appropriate national implementation of different legislations at country level. And finally, I would like to emphasize that through making novel combination, plant breeding actually creates more biodiversity by developing new varieties that are better yielding, more nutritious, and better adapted to the changing environment. Often, this improved germplasm is deposited by the seed sector to the national gene banks. like commercial varieties in plant variety protection, for example, in India. Also, seed companies provide critical in-kind support to the public gene banks by regenerating and characterizing millions of accessions. So these activities should also be considered as a contribution for conserving global biodiversity. I like to conclude by summarizing the seed sector requests, a simpler process that covers both DSI and genetic resources, legal certainty for the users, avoidance of overlapping obligations, and more awareness initiatives on the payment rates and obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivendra. Yes, certainly awareness is an important thing. John, what can you add to enlighten us? You have the floor.
Thank you. Before again, I would like to echo our strong supports for the concerns that have already been raised. Shivendra did a great job explaining this on why we must ensure non-duplication with national ABS laws. Very strong support of this. I'm not going to dive into it further. That's extremely important, I think, for all sectors. With that, I would like to quickly address another definitional issue and then a little bit more in depth the importance of transparency in the allocation of funds. First, we understand that some parties view indirect use as also encompassing downstream entities. However, we're concerned that this approach would result in stacking of payments across the value chain, so not just one payment for the same use, more than one. So a single point of responsibility must be established to avoid duplicate payments. In the cosmetics sector, we believe that the well-known term utilization, as defined under the Nagoya Protocol, would be very useful to help address this issue. Finally, it is absolutely essential to the cosmetics sector that there be utmost transparency and accountability in fund allocation to maintain trust in the multilateral mechanism. Transparency must extend beyond the fund's central administration to include clear reporting at the national level and from grantees. For businesses, this is not just a matter of principle, this is a legal necessity. Companies that contribute must demonstrate that their payments are used for biodiversity-related initiatives against measurable outcomes and do not pose corruption risk. Without proper oversight, businesses could face legal, reputational, and regulatory scrutiny if funds are misallocated or fail to support biodiversity outcomes. We realize that transparency also requires resources, but efforts must still be made to limit administrative costs. I suspect everyone on this call agrees that we must maximize the resources of the Cali Fund applied for the conservation of biological diversity. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Yes, and of course that issue of the reputational risk of corruption is one that everyone who works for a company will particularly face when you are trying to convince the decision makers in your company to contribute to the Cali Fund. And so, Marcus, since you're the only one of the panelists who actually works directly for a company, you have the floor next.
Many thanks again. And I will refer to the importance of a level playing field. As I've mentioned in my first intervention, the current modalities of the multilateral mechanism do not offer good, strong incentives for companies to subscribe to the mechanism. However, for the mechanism to become a success, it is important that the vast majority of companies can be convinced to join the MLM. And I will explain for two reasons why this is the case. First, if only few companies join, there will be a small payer base in the first place. In addition, those joining will at least initially have a competitive disadvantage and will call for small contribution rates in order to minimize the competitive disadvantage. For the second reason, the following aspects are also relevant. The mechanism still is voluntary, so every company can decide on its own either to join the MLM or to comply with the national ABS laws, also for the use of DSI. In addition, it is important to consider that typical supply chain in our industries are complex and that use or utilization, whatever is the trigger, can happen at multiple stages of the supply chain. Also, John alluded to that. This then means that if only a limited proportion of companies join the multilateral mechanism, companies would need to pay into the Cali Fund and would still need to maintain the tracking and tracing of both genetic resources and DSI for those companies in the supply chain, for instance, our customers, which do not join the multilateral mechanism. In conclusion, to make the multilateral mechanism truly meaningful for industry, it is my conviction that the vast majority of companies need to be convinced to participate in the MLM, preferably through a straightforward, globally harmonized approach. Only then will we reach a level playing field, as indicated at the start. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Julia, would you want to go next, please?
Of course. I'd like to agree with the last comments made by Marcus, and I would like to especially bring to attention as well the challenge related to the indicative rates that we have on the decision and regarding the double payments. But regarding the different types of use that I mentioned before, I'd like to emphasize the use of DSI in commercial products. It's not yet a reality for most of Brazilian industries. The majority of industries that use DSI are in more initial stage of R&D or have limited products that use DSI. So the decision can create a distortion. For example, a company that uses only 3% of DSI in its product portfolio and other company that use 100%, both would be taxed equally on their revenue and profit under the current MLM model. The existing model could penalize industry and discourage the investment in technological innovation and development. And this is the opposite of what the Brazilian biodiversity law aims to promote. So CNI understand that uniform rates detached from the actual utilization of DSI may lead to economic distortions and undermine equitable treatment among business actors. And we are therefore advocating for a complementary and alternative approach that incorporates product-based criteria alongside the revenue and profit approach. And we believe that this approach would ensure that companies are assessed based on the actual use of DSI in their products rather than solely on their, for example, sector affiliation. And this would provide a more equitable and accurate framework, helping to avoid unintended economic distortions and combining the approach. We believe it would foster innovation and particularly in developing countries like Brazil, where business may face more limited resources. And it would also help avoid disencourage the R&D. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Melchior, as the biggest sector with the highest profit rates and the longest development cycles, you have the last word on this panel, please.
Thanks, Pierre, for the honor. I think there are so many different issues to address that it's difficult to hone in, but I'm going to try and hone in on two aspects. One is, and trying to be a bit more kind of concrete, one is on the certificates and the way they're included in the decision. I think when we read it now, there's a lot of kind of lack of clarity around what the certificate actually gives to those who get a certificate. It's not really clear how they get a certificate, who gives the certificate, and how governments recognize the certificate. And I think it's actually, I'm focusing in on the certificates because I'm aligned with a lot of the points that other people have said, especially around the need for legal certainty, the stacking of obligations and things like this. But especially the certificates is potentially an operational mechanism that we can use to solve some of those issues depending on how they're established. And I think it's really important to continue work on that and really kind of focus on them. For us, one way of solving some of these issues is to make sure that the certificate legally guarantees that entity participation in the MLM through a voluntary contribution constitutes full compliance with all ABS rules and regulations for any use, for any purpose, and at any time in all 196 countries that are parties to the CBD. I think that's one nice way of solving a few of these issues that we see. The other aspect, and it's a bit linked to what Julia was saying, was in terms of the rationale for the contributions. We're very disappointed in the fact that there really wasn't a rationale or justification for the contributions, the contribution rates in the decision itself. There's a lack of there's a need for a deeper understanding of the context. As I mentioned before, the sectors are different, the profit margins are different, the return on investment, the amount that different companies invest in R&D itself, the success rate. Another figure for you is that only 0.1% to 0.2% of compounds synthesized make it to market within our sector. And I think there are a number of different factors that need to really be addressed, justified, and rationalized before we can convince companies to sign up to a system. And I think that's really the fact, is we need to create a system which incentivizes people to join and creates a bit of a win-win situation for everyone. But
thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's a great way to end this panel, because we'll now move on to the second panel, where we will be looking at potential solution pathways that will get us to that win-win situation. The chat will now be open for comments and questions by the audience. We have sort of broadly asked the panelists here to look at two potential levels of action that need to be taken to make the Cali Fund and the multilateral mechanism operational. Those are measures that can be taken by government or private sector at national level, of course, at private sector, also at company level, and then at the aspect of what can be done at the international multilateral level in terms of guidance by the COP and input to the COP, so that it can produce useful guidance that brings everyone on board and make the system functional. Our first panelist for the second panel is Birgit Winkel. She's from the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection in Germany. She's also a microbiologist by training, and she's responsible for the Nagoya Protocol and the multilateral mechanism in Germany. Birgit, you have the floor.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Pierre, for the kind introduction. Honestly, the name of our ministry changed 2 days ago, because we have a new government, and so now it's also climate protection and so on. But I don't want to annoy you with the shortening of this ministry. So good time of the day to everybody from Bonn. It's sunny here, so it's nice here, and I hope you also have nice weather in your wherever you are. Just to clarify, my statements here are given in my position as a responsible person at the German Ministry for the Environment and should not be seen as a German position. First of all, I want to thank the ABS Initiative and ICC for organizing this very important webinar and the possibility for me to join as a panelist. For me and the Ministry for the Environment, it was a great success last year that COP16 was able to conclude on Decision 16.2. There are certain points that are determined now and give a basis on which we can work, but we all need to work together. Not to be misunderstood, I also see certain shortcomings in the decision and therefore understand that industry needs further instruction and support on how it should proceed. But these shortcomings should not be used as an excuse to deny the responsibility of the private sector to contribute to the Cali Fund, especially the industry that easily identifies itself as being beneficiary of public available DSI. Generally speaking, Germany is admitted to take international treaties and its decisions serious, and therefore seeks to implement decisions, which in the sense of the Decision 16.2 means that we are working on measures to incentivize users in our jurisdiction to contribute to the Cali Fund. To get a common ground and understand addressing the uncertainties and the concerns of the ministries and the private sector, we organized interministerial workshops, a roundtable with industry representatives from companies and ICC, had bilateral meetings with those who were open to discuss concerns and possibly solutions. The roundtable on incentives we had in March is the most relevant for this webinar, I think. Our most interesting result was that the biggest issue is communication. Guidance on the interpretation of the decision is needed and has to be well communicated to users. Also communicating that the sectors are not identified due to harm they cause to biodiversity. The reason was not to blame them, but alert their responsibility to share benefits as they profit from the use of DSI. It is necessary to communicate that the period up to COP16 can be seen as a kind of pilot phase. It should show that the MLM is functioning, but also what the shortcomings are. Industry needs clarity what its obligations are and how much they can profit from contributing. We as governments can only assure contributors that from our side, there is no need to share further benefits from DSI. We also need to assure industry that we do not want to put additional bureaucratic burden on them. We as Germany are working on a solution to exclude double payments. Altogether in Germany, we are still in the brainstorming phase on what kind of incentives we as the government, German government can provide and how an implementation may look like. Our plan is to finish the brainstorming phase in October and provide the first draft for implementing rules at the end of the year. We as the German government needs to work together to align our incentives. We, the governments, all the governments all over the world need to work together to align our incentives, guarantee a level playing field and assure compliance. Germany has always negotiated in a way that opening the MLM for genetic resources is our aim on the long run, and we want to exclude hybrid systems. This, very unfortunate, is an incentive for the industry that lays in the hand of the countries that regulate their DSI and genetic resources. What really needs to be said is that from my point of view, if there are no payments until COP17, negotiations will be difficult. And if there are no payments until COP18, the pilot test, including the decision, is going to fail. And we can expect more and more countries regulating DSI from their genetic resources under national law. On the other side, if countries see a value in joining the MLM because they can expect benefits, industry will be able to reduce compliance measures and may be able to contribute even more into the fund. Concerning the indicative rate, for us, we still interpreted it as indicative. From my point of view, any payment is better than no payment. So my plan is that we will reward our or incentivize any payment at a reasonable rate. Yes, thank you. That's for my first statement.
Thank you very much, Birgit. Our next speaker is Charlotte Blom. She works for Novonesis in Denmark, where she's the Senior Technology Policy Manager. Charlotte, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity in this panel. So in the first panel, there was already mentioned a lot of the challenges that is standing in the way for what Birgit is asking us to do and others, and what we would like to end up doing in the end to contribute to the fund. But that there needs to be a recognition and a process for that there are the challenges, big challenges for companies to be incentivized to contribute. It was recognized at the negotiations before the conclusion was made that further work is needed. And how this can be done before the next COP, I'm not sure, but we need to explore options for, how to work as effective as possible towards COP17 to ensure the greatest chances of success of this mechanism. Yeah, so just to introduce myself a little more, yeah, so in the company I work in, it's an industrial biotech company where we develop biological solutions for more than 30 different industry areas, and it's at our heart to develop solutions for a healthier planet and people and a more sustainable world. We work with microorganisms. I also have the scientific background and know how it is in the daily life to work with all the regulations in the different regulations in different countries. And that is also why we really welcomed the decision to make a multilateral mechanism. And this was a great success by itself. So now we need to make sure that it becomes successful. And for now, how the decision is made, I mean, it would not make a big difference to the companies with respect to compliance and so on, because we still need to be in compliance with our use of genetic resources and the DSI that is derived from it and so on. So how can we then create incentives? One thing is that there's a lot of things that has also been mentioned that were unclear, and that Birgit also alluded to, that things need to be clarified. I believe this will take some time to clarify these things. There's a reason that they were not already clarified. It's very complex, and this reflects also that there is a great diversity of different users, different type of companies, different type of users, different type of products, and so on. And what we can see after the decision is that for many companies, it's hard for them to kind of see themselves in this and see that it kind of makes sense to them, the way things is described. Not that companies don't want to share benefits, but kind of different aspects are not resonating. And I think that's really what we need to work towards. So one thing is the need for clarification and definitions and so on. And as has already been mentioned, there needs to be a process for that. And also it's a challenge that many industries in general, we see that the payment is very high and not reflecting kind of the benefits gained from the use of public DSI. And that's a big challenge to then explain why the cost is so high, and it has not been reflected in the previous reports and so on. So these aspects needs to be addressed also. And I can see my time is up now, so I will end here for now.
All your time's up. I might not even come back to you in the second round. No, I'm joking. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Our next panelist is Henri de Novillon. He's from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change in Brazil, where he's the head of the Genetic Heritage Department. Henri, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm also speaking on my personal capacity. I would like to start by saying that we must recognize that any step that brings us closer to the goal of conserving biodiversity is an important step. But any step, no matter how small, still requires caution regarding the type of terrain on which we are treading. In this sense, regarding incentives for industry engagement, I think we should try this new opportunity to implement an ABS mechanism by taking a cautious step-by-step approach without putting the cart before the horse. I mean, let's see how it works before we start to discuss broadening its scope. Since we have now this new opportunity, it's important to keep it simple, user-friendly, and able to dialogue with national legislations, the Nagoya Protocol implemented structures, and future mechanisms such as the ABBNJ. The mechanism can be the one-stop shop to centralize all benefit-sharing obligations on international agreements, but has first to work for DSI under the CBD. In this sense, we should work to implement a mechanism which is not concurrent with the Nagoya Protocol, but complementary and mutually supportive. I mean, we should take advantage and use the structure already in place in Nagoya, like checkpoints, IRCCs, ABS communiques, and so on, and allow them to play a mutually supportive role towards the mechanism and the fund. For instance, we could have an IRCC for the mechanism that would be equivalent to the IRCC of Nagoya, and it should also be recognized by national checkpoints and competent authorities as equivalent to a Nagoya IRCC to a certain extent. And on the contrary, if a user has fulfilled its benefit sharing obligations regarding DSI use in a national level, its Nagoya's IRCC could be recognized by the mechanism as its equivalent. This would facilitate implementation of measures at the national level to align national systems with the mechanism, thus also enhancing countries' engagement. So I also agree that sharing benefits from DSI use to the mechanism could be recognized as satisfying national benefit sharing obligations. That is why a declaratory system and the possibility to include products, as suggested in LSE study, play an important role for transparency, accountability, and societal recognition. That could be a measure to attract users to the mechanism by avoiding the incentives such as overlapping obligations and payments. In this sense, the mechanism must be able to elaborate innovative measures that will avoid economic distortions on one hand and erosion of rights of parties and IPLCs to benefit sharing on the other. It must be able to balance these two aspects. It must be a user-friendly mechanism, but it also must be a biodiversity-friendly mechanism, in the sense that it will have to promote the conditions to facilitate benefits to be shared by users, but also the conditions to benefits to flow to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. If the fund is efficient in channeling resources for conservation, that will also play an important role for industries to build trust in the mechanism. It must work on both ends to engage industries, parties, and indigenous people, local communities. I thank you.
Thanks, Henri. Yes, building trust and getting started, I think, is a very important part of what we're trying to do if we are to find solution pathways. Our next speaker is Jasmina Muminovic. She's from Bayer Crop Sciences. She's a plant breeder, but she's also the head of genetic resources at Bayer Crop Science. Jasmina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pierre. Good day, everybody. And also from me, thank you for joining us today on the webinar. My contribution will also focus on possible pathways forward for a couple of issues, starting maybe with some insights regarding the compliance landscape for companies. And like many have mentioned already, for the MLM to truly function as a multilateral mechanism, it really must allow companies to share benefits obtained on DSI, not as an alternative, actually as an alternative and not in addition to national ABS obligations. At a minimum, companies participating in the MLM should be recognized as compliant with relevant national obligations. And to achieve this, we can maybe think of a few key actions. First being the formal recognition. So countries could officially state, for instance, on the ABS clearinghouse, that contributions to the MLM fulfill any benefit sharing obligations related to publicly available DSI in their national legislation. And the second is a clear certification. The certificate of compliance should also clearly indicate that contributors have met all ABS requirements under national laws and are not required to share further benefits. It would really also be crucial that different ABS processes do not lead to overlapping payments. We have heard it already multiple times. So during negotiations, it's also parties who have expressed the focus of avoiding stacking of obligations, and Birgit referred to that too. This should be really implemented effectively. It could maybe be proposed that a country commitment not to impose national obligations on contributors be recognized as a criterion for funding allocation, which would also ensure that all countries adhere to the same rules, receiving benefits either through the Cali Fund or national law. And lastly, and coming from the seed sector, actually working mostly in plant genetic resources, Achieving full harmonization of the implementation of the COP decision and other multilateral ABS mechanisms, which clearly for seed industry is a multilateral system of the international treaty, that would be vital for the sector. Another essential element would be the path towards expansion of the scope of the MLM, and I was happy to see that there were already some comments in the chat around it. Namely, the MLM that would allow inclusion of benefit sharing of the use of genetic resources as well could significantly help prevent overlapping payments and obligations. And this is crucial not only from that compliance and legal certainty standpoint, it is also important due to scientific realities of how genetic resources and DSI are practically used in research and development. So DSI is derived from genetic resource, and in many cases, they're inseparable in research projects. So it's practically impossible for us to differentiate DSI products from genetic resources products. So in expanding the MLM scope to include benefit sharing on all DSI and ultimately encompass benefit sharing on genetic resources would make sense scientifically, would also offer a multilateral approach to benefit sharing for the use of all genetic diversity. One-stop shop, if you will. Such an outcome would definitely serve as a strong incentive for companies to engage, as the MLM could then provide users with global ABS compliance guarantee. Daphne also mentioned at the beginning of the webinar that currently many major multinational companies spend significant resources on ABS compliance. So imagine if these funds could be redirected towards biodiversity conservation efforts, that would encourage the participation of these companies. However, of course, it is vital to understand that, companies need to be assured that no additional ABS compliance costs would arise, meaning that the system they contribute to must encompass all DSI and genetic resources. Unfortunately, this discussion on the expansion of the MLM scope, will only happen in COP 18. So we will all have to be patient, but we are open to discuss. Very briefly, and I see that my time is coming to an end, I would also like to bring up an important issue, which is the crucial need to facilitate constructive input from companies. This can be achieved if the companies or if the businesses are given full membership in the representation of the steering committee, and also have sufficient number of seats to reflect on the diversity of business stakeholders, both within and between different sectors. Let me also emphasize here, it would not be the aim, of course, of business participants to dominate or control decision-making process, but instead contribute valuable expertise and insights that can enhance the effectiveness of the system, build trust and confidence. Broader spectrum of users' perspective and expertise would be brought forward, and finally, real world and economic context would be covered. Probably also needless to say, this would motivate many companies to join the system sooner rather than later. And as another important issue is that we could also consider gradually reducing the impact of the of the industry participation in the steering committee over time as the trust and the functionalities of the system continue to improve. So as a conclusion, yes, I like many have said already, biodiversity preservation is a global challenge and a global commitment, and we all have a say and a role to play in it. But for that to materialize, we need to work together, we need to try different ideas, we need to learn from the different ideas, and also be open to listen and comprehend the different challenges and needs of the different stakeholders to understand what can really realistically happen. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jasmina. So our next speaker is Katie Beckett. She's from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. And she once worked for the Phytotrade Africa, Southern African Natural Products Trade Association a long time ago when I first met Katie. Katie, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Pierre, and thanks so much to the ABS Initiative for organising this. It's great to see so many familiar faces online too. I have to say, having listened to the conversation so far, I'm really quite encouraged, actually. Yes, there's a lot of challenges that have been presented, but I think we're also actually hearing a lot of solutions put forward too. So I do think the conversation has been really rich, and I do think we have a lot to build on. So it'd be great to share some thoughts too. yes, as I said, there are challenges, but we've also made a huge amount of progress. So at COP15, as you know, parties agreed that benefits should be shared from the use of digital sequence information. And then at COP16, we agreed the modalities. And then just earlier this year, the Cali Fund was launched. And that's quick progress. I think we did really well in that regard. It has lots of innovative features, and it allows us to mobilize finance for biodiversity, to close that biodiversity finance gap, which we're all trying to do. And I know we've heard that from all speakers pretty much, that we're all in agreement on that as our kind of our underlying objectives. I wanted just to share some thoughts on the specific challenges that have been highlighted by previous speakers. And some of what I'm saying is actually going to reiterate some of the points that others have made, which also I think is encouraging, because I think we're all thinking along the similar lines. So to start with, around the certainty and obligation stacking, that is something that is really critical. And I hear that time and time again when I speak to a variety of different industry players in different sectors as well. This is absolutely key. And I do think that this could ultimately be one of the major keys in unlocking contributions to the Cali Fund. So we've been working, the UK has been working with some other parties to develop a proposal, to develop an idea around how that could be actually practically addressed. And the idea would be something around some kind of commitment to parties, by parties, which would commit to or provide the assurances that where contributions were being made to the Cali Fund, that would in turn equate to compliance with domestic measures or national measures covering digital sequence information on genetic resources when that DSI is in publicly available databases. And we've heard similar ideas from a few speakers already. And I think that could be one thing that we could really hone in on as a process to move forward and address one of those challenges on obligation stacking between multilateral and bilateral measures. Another thing that I wanted to pick up on is on the level playing field. And I understand from the Secretariat that they are busy and in the process of preparing a guide, some kind of documentation that would help users understand more of the decision and help create that better level playing field as well. So I think that's something that is coming, and we should keep watch for that, because I do think that could help on the level playing field point. Someone raised a point around transparency. That is also very key, and that's another point that comes up in a lot of my discussions with different companies on the transparency and the accountability and how the funds are going to be used when they flow out the other side of the Cali Fund. And the decision does go some way in addressing that. The language in the decision talks about the need to have funds flowing into biodiversity ring-fence funds at the national level. So that should provide some assurances. And also that the funding would be used in those developing countries for the implementation of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, NBSAPs. And those processes are in place already, including national reporting. So I think there is some things that we can lean on in those existing structures and processes, which would mainstream those actions. It would have less kind of overheads as well, using the processes that are already up and running under the CBD reporting process. A couple of other things. Oh, I see my camera's you've already jumped on. Let me see which ones to bring. Okay, one, I think on the proportionate benefit sharing expectations, again, that's a key message that I hear time and time from businesses on those percentages that are in the decision. If you look at paragraph 4 of the annex, then it does draw back on the fact that there's this intersessional process running, there's these studies running. So a huge thank you to everybody that contributed to those notifications that came out seeking views, because I think that'll be a really important process when we come back to look at those thresholds and those contributions rates. So don't take that's a closure of that issue. I think there's still more work to be done there. I've got 2 things I was going to say. Let me say one of them in the interest of time, and that's about the real critical thing, I think, to make this work is to let others know about it. We can talk to each other about it, but we talk to each other about it all the time. We need to start spreading the word now. It needs to go further. We need to have those conversations across our networks, up and down our value chains, to really make sure that the Cali Fund is going to be effective and a success. And we do need your help, all those businesses, all those associations that are online today, like a real call for your support in that. Please do spread the word about the Cali Fund, because by doing that, we're going to be building the trust. It's companies that allow companies to step forward to implement. Countries will step forward, provide the assurances that there will not be these overlaps, or there will not be this obligation stacking. And then I think we're on the path to delivering something really exciting and really impactful for biodiversity. Thanks, Pierre. Thanks,
Katie. Yes, I like the positivity coming out of that. It's actually an important thing for finding solutions. So far we've heard from industry and from government representatives, and now just to mix it up a little bit, our next speaker is Sapriya Kamath from the London School of Economics, where she's an associate professor of education. She specializes in accounting and regulatory measures and corporate governance, and has advised before the European Parliament and the Indian Ministry of Finance. Sapriya, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Pierre, and the ABS initiative for inviting me. Very interesting points raised by everyone so far. I particularly like Pierre's metaphor of that we are building a life raft while the world is burning. That seems more appropriate. The Cali Fund was created to answer one of the toughest questions in biodiversity governance. How do we fairly and equitably share the benefits that arise from the use of genetic resources? We have all been talking about incentives and mechanisms, but we should not lose sight of the fact that this fund, which supports the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, was a response to a crisis. The current rate of species extinction, which is estimated to be 10 to 100 times higher than the natural background rate. So I'm very glad that we all came together, due to the global will. The fund exists. The next challenge is, how do we make it work? This is complex and political, and that's why I'm here today, to bring rigorous research-led thinking to this conversation. So let me offer 4 focus areas. The first is about transparency, which many of you have spoken about, but you have spoken about in the context of funds flowing out. I will talk about transparency about funds flowing in. So at the country level, visibility drives participation. So countries could have a public transparency register that can highlight companies that contribute, and have awards and recognition to first movers or large contributors. There's also a room for gentle push. So countries could publish a list of companies that haven't contributed. The goal is to turn contribution into a reputational asset. At the COP level, we could have a global dashboard that shows which countries have contributed and how much. The second mechanism is the evolution of the contribution mechanism itself. We have heard how the sectors can vary in DSI use from 100% to just 1 or 2 products. We have 2 options here. We could explore a product-based model, but that would be in the long run, because as an immediate step, we would need further disclosures from companies, and then we would move towards it. But this particular model, although it's more accurate, is going to be very complex. An alternative is to go with the sector-based model that we already have and look at fine-tuning it based on real-world data, further studies, and disclosures. The third solution pathway that I offer is to look at financing. So companies can issue sustainability-linked bonds that could raise funds to pay into the Cali Fund and also go towards meeting their biodiversity targets. Why should they issue these bonds or take sustainability-linked loans? That's because it generates reputational effect with their investors and other stakeholders. But is the onus only on the companies? No. The country's central banks can support sustainability-linked bonds by accepting these as instruments for collateral. And the European Central Bank has already done something similar. So having biodiversity as one of the goals within the sustainability-linked bonds would enable this kind of financing. And finally, investors in particular have a huge role to play. So institutional investors can push for executive pay to be tied to biodiversity goals, and in particular contributions towards Cali Fund. So platforms like Principles for Responsible Investment and Finance for Biodiversity are very critical over here. So to conclude, if we want the Cali Fund to succeed, we need action across multiple levels, at the COP level, governments, the companies themselves, and from the investors and general public. So whether we do it through transparency, mechanism design, financial policy, or investor pressure, we do have the tools to make Cali Fund a turning point to share fairly and equitably the benefits that arise from the use of DSI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Supriya. So we're now running a little bit short of time. So I want to ask the members of the team who've been collecting questions to hold on a little bit longer while we continue with the second panel. And I want to ask permission from participants to go a little bit over the allocated time. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes. If you absolutely have to leave, you will of course be able to catch up by watching the end of the recordings, which will be made available soon after the webinar. So I would like to know if there's anyone on the panel at the moment who have a very strong response to anything that was said by any of your fellow panelists. Please raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. I don't see any, so I'm going to ask Henry, what do you think about the approaches to making the Cali Fund operational and finding solution pathways that you've heard so far?
Thank you, Pierre. Well, regarding approaches, I would suggest we should take a 2 orders of time approaches. The adoption of the mechanism in the fund is an important step, but we must implement it without jumping steps. We must move on under 2 orders of time. The first is to implement the mechanism in the fund, how they are now, implement its provisions, make it both operational and efficient, but do it bear in mind the second order of time, which is the need to the mechanism to evolve according to the circumstances. I mean, we should be able to implement it now, learning by doing, but with the capability to assess, adapt, update, and correct asymmetries and inequalities, improving it while implementing. We must do it in a cautious pace right now, while sending the message that there is room for future decision-making on adjustments on the mechanism scope, percentage, modalities, and so on. It's important to make it flexible and adjustable, so to allow the mechanism to correct economic distortions. We must adopt the approach of complementarity of mechanisms and cautious optimism, moving forward with each step, but leaving room to adjust the pace, direction, and characteristics of this journey. To conclude, no double payments, no cascade effect. There is very important, but we also must avoid double exemptions. I mean, who is not covered by the mechanism or doesn't use it as an opportunity to facilitate compliance with DSI use, we still need to share benefits through the mainstream channels. Thank you, Pierre.
Thanks, Naveen. Anyone else wants to go next? Quickly now. If not, then I'm going to ask Birgit. Birgit, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel based on what you've heard so far?
First of all, I think I can support Henry by saying we have to have a stepwise approach, but I think some people have to move. So we can think this as a kind of ladder. Like there have to be some contributions, and then maybe that the countries see that industry can be trusted, and so on. So that's the reason why I said it should not be the indicative rate. It is not necessary to pay by the indicative rate, but I think companies should just think about themselves how much they would be able to pay to get the reputation that they are one of the early movers, that they are willing to pay for the DSI fund and for biodiversity. That was my opinion, but it has to be started now to have a stepwise approach. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Raises a question that I want to ask to Charlotte. Nonesis used to be called Novozymes, and it was at a very long time ago already. One of the companies was trying very hard to comply with ABS. Do you agree that there's a need for early movers and that there's a certain early mover advantage?
Well, I think those two things are not linked at the moment because there's no certainty for compliance if you pay. So if you pay now, it's more for your reputation and as kind of charity. But I mean, we are still a company that really wants to comply and supports this process. I'm a little concerned about the urgency because this is very complex, and I mean, if we shouldn't ruin the process by, I mean, we need to make sure that the mechanism will be improved so that many companies are on board. It doesn't help if there's a few early movers and then we say, oh, it works, see, someone are paying, and then we don't improve the mechanism. So, but whether there is a way that companies can pay before, I mean, it can be discussed. It's there's no conclusions on that. So, but I definitely agree that we need from industry to show our commitment in this and that we want to pay, but that there are things right now that are not aligned with what was agreed at COP15, for example, and these things needs to be improved. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anyone who wants to respond particularly before I pick someone and volunteer someone? Katie, can I ask you? I mean, Charlotte says there's no real advantage in moving first. I mean, how about if a government just told companies they must pay? How would that work?
Yeah, I mean that would be quite a different picture, wouldn't it? We haven't heard from any specific government so far that they will put in place legislation, but it's definitely an option. I mean, the decision says that countries can put in place or take policy, administrative, or legislative measures to encourage or require businesses within their jurisdictions to make contributions to the Cali Fund. So the option is there. And it's interesting. I mean, I think that is not where industry or the conversations that I've been having with industry have been pushing the discussion. I feel like there's a lot more that we can do kind of through conversations first to make sure that everyone is in a comfortable place to make contributions that they feel is appropriate. And I think that process will play out as we lead up to COP17 and the intersessional work that is running now. I think perhaps more can be achieved first before we look at legislative measures, but that provision is within the decision should countries decide to take that approach. I mean, the other thing ultimately you could look at would be some kind of protocol or treaty. But again, I'm not sure that would actually help matters quite now yet, whether we want to go down that route or not. I mean, from the conversations that I've been having with businesses, I do think it's encouraging. I mean, businesses are looking at this really seriously from what I can see. They're looking at how they can really make this work. And I think that is really encouraging. Yes, I would like to see money flow into the Cali Fund today. I'd love somebody to step up in this call and say, look, we're ready. Here we go. Let's get this thing running. And I do think there is an element of having to have those leaders across the business community to step forward, make the contributions and get things started. Whilst recognizing that, of course, there are still some challenges that we need to address. I mean, I don't need to say, everyone on this call knows that we are running out of time, like that biodiversity needs support and needs conservation now. We won't have everything perfect. Maybe perfect is the enemy of the good in this case. Let's get it running now. Let's get the money flowing out the other side to Indigenous peoples and local communities while we continue to improve the mechanism. So yeah, if anyone wants to make any contributions, then let's do it. Let's get going. Thanks, Pierre.
Thanks, Katie. So Priya, you raised your hand. I'm going to give you the last word before I ask my colleagues to see if they want to bring in any of the questions from the chat. So Priya, you have the floor.
Thanks, Pierre. I just wanted to say, echo what Katie and Brigitte said earlier, which is about, getting contributions in. Charlotte has said there's no real benefit, but I think countries have a place to play in incentivizing companies to move first. And, by creating reputational benefits, they will, if you have awards you recognize publicly, there are reputational benefits in the stock market. There are reputational benefits that come from consumers. So it's not necessarily a charity, as it was mentioned. It's not, it might not be perfect, but there are going to be reputational benefits. And so, countries can create those incentivizing conditions for companies to go first. So.
Thank you very much. Jasmina, you also wanted the floor, please.
Yes, before we move to the next questions, and yeah, maybe really nicely connecting to what Cyprian just said. Yeah, we don't think that paying for biodiversity conservation would be a charity, but we also don't think that it all ends up just with reputational benefiting for companies or, the reputational outcome. And yeah, I actually wanted to say, like, why are we not talking about first movers right away? Yeah, the big elephant in the room, that we have not mentioned is, we don't still know what DSI is and what we would be actually paying for. So apart from paying for publicly available genetic sequence information in the databases, what companies want to do and definitely have in their strategic commitments is payment for biodiversity conservation. We want to contribute to biodiversity conservation, but does that necessarily mean that we want to pay huge amounts of money for publicly available DSI without actually having the real connection to what value does that information bring to our final products and to our, sales or profits? Yeah, that's a big challenging piece. So yeah, it's kind of not the same. Maybe benefits shared on the use of publicly available DSI would contribute to the conservation of biodiversity, but I think we're very often losing that perspective that, we are actually talking about funding biodiversity conservation. And maybe, this direction of talking specifically DSI, publicly available DSI, and expecting huge amounts of money from companies for that is not the actual business case that companies would consider relevant. So it's not charity, but it's also not reputational piece. So it has to be meaningful in business terms for companies. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jasmina. I'm now going to ask either Hartmut or Suhal. We've been scanning the chat. I'm sure we've all been looking at it while we've been paying attention. Those of us who can multitask. I can't. So Suhal, Hartmut, one of you, please, come in.
Yes. Well, the chat is busy. There are a lot of, let's say, technical questions which would deserve another webinar. But I think the one, there are several questions. I'm concentrating on one topic. We already had the famous first movers, and I think if I want to summarize that, is that industry was had a lot of concerns, and I would also join that with the notion that how would you work together with governments? Because in many parts also governmental action would be there. So for example, also what is DSI, etc. That's very simple to answer. Yeah, many people answered this already. So I think instead of asking what is it, there should be action with certain governments to come up with solutions. So I think that is what I would take out of several of the comments in the chat, and I would like to put that to you, maybe with a concrete question. Governments work together, say a bit more than just having a round table like in Germany, but really on concrete examples, how could it work at national level, of course? That would be some question out of this chat.
Thanks, Hartmut. So you want to also put in your
right. Maybe
or questions?
Yeah, I mean, as Hartmut said, it's extremely rich and provides enough topical questions for a couple of webinars. But one aspect that also popped up in the panel and also in the chat is the one of communication. Yeah. So and in this regard, of course, who communicates to whom, and is there also a need for a complementarity and a joint effort in communication? We heard, of course, there's a need to comment associations to companies, but also within the companies to the CEOs, to the shareholders. On the other hand, also this question: what do they get in return in reputation? So how does broad public needs to be informed so that they also see that for this certificate, however this is going to be established and what it's going to contain, that companies are doing a good thing. So in this regard, how do we strategize around communication? Do we need an overall framework? Do we do it just at country level? What's the recipe?
Thank you. So, any responses from any of the panelists to those questions? The communication one, maybe. I mean, how do we go about that?
I can maybe very briefly start. I think there is also need for communication at country level between different, parts of the government, different authorities, because they were talking laws that are partly governed by ministries of environment, partly governed by ministries of agriculture, partly governed by, other ministries when it comes to IP laws and stuff. So how the national implementation would then be established and implemented finally would also be a matter of within country communication, which not always is problematic. There are different examples at country levels of where it works better and where it doesn't. But I think for communication, if I got the question right, Suhel, as industry, we actually have a very active access and benefit sharing task force work under the International Chamber of Commerce, and we are always very open to communicate with all governments, with all stakeholders. And there have been examples, Birgit mentioned some, but there are also other known examples of industry actively participating in different workshops, different exchanges, retreats, and dialogues on DSI. So anytime that there is an opportunity for industry to provide insights and to talk to any government, we are definitely available and willing to do so. So how who initiates it and how that works out are probably then the technical details and will depend on, let's say, on the timing that we have. I thought and think everybody agreed that last pre-COP16 intersessional period was super heavy with interaction. There was so much work happening in that intersessional period. I don't think that we have that pressure now going to the next COP, but there will be studies coming up. There will be calls for different inputs from different stakeholders. So there will probably be another opportunity to re-establish and, you know, reconnect with across the stakeholders groups. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, we're getting to the very close to the end of our time. But I have seen questions here, and it just connects to what Jasmina just said. Asking, you know, what are the chances that there will be any money by COP17, or are we going to wait for more clarifications by COP18? And, you know, what is going to happen then to target 19 and 2030 and basically the whole plan for biodiversity? I was wondering if anyone had, you know, there's a time frame to this, right? So I wonder if anyone had any further responses to that. I see Birgit, you've got your hand up, please.
Yes, thank you. I think getting also replying on what has been said before, but also on your question. So first of all, when I said that I think that action is needed now, I didn't mean that tomorrow there has to be money in the fund, but I meant that communication is needed in between governments, between the industry and so on. And this is really now. So we should not wait until everybody else has a solution, because nobody then would have a solution. We really need to work together, as I said, between the industry and governments, and in between governments, and also in the government with different ministries, as Jasmina said, which we really do. So that's what I said with the workshops. We really try to find a common sense in the German government. So yes, I really think that it would be problematic if at least at COP18 there would not be a reasonable amount of money in the fund. So this is just what I had. That was the reason why we were negotiating on DSI at all, because the benefit has to be shared, and their money has to get into the fund, and it was difficult to mobilize the private sector beforehand. So I think this would be really difficult. What I mean, I cannot tell you what will happen, but I think there's a lot of pressure, especially from the Global South, on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Birgit. The Global South. Henri, you have any thoughts about this?
Well, actually, I wish to react to one comment from our colleague Elpidio, if I may. I think we should recall that the decision 16.2 has given the industry a limited time window to show that they are willing to work in a voluntary system to mobilize resources for biodiversity. And if we fail to do so transparently and accountably, it is inevitable that governments will implement additional measures to compel users to do so. That's why it must work since now. And finally, I'm also very fond of the idea of building initiatives to promote industry's engagement, a coalition of the willing, composed by parties and industries, that could promote and show that the Cali Fund is not just another ABS mechanism, but rather the mechanism for building trust, legal certainty, and predictability, so necessary for us to fund conservation through the benefit sharing. I think it's a great opportunity for all parties and stakeholders as a whole to work together to make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that brings us back to the question that Suhal raised from the chat, which also, if you've seen, there was some input there from Bart about India and Kenya bringing in national obligations to pay for DSI. So, you know, who moves first? Is this a Mexican standard, they say? Whoever moves first loses. I've asked Charlotte about that already, but I mean, how do we get out of this, considering the need to build the life raft? Any answers to that? Or should we say that is a very good place to start?
I'm very happy to jump in quickly,
Katie,
Pierre.
yes,
I mean, I think on that, I think both need to move together. I think industry and countries need to move together on this at the same time to step forward, to come into a place that the gap in trust is much narrower and that we can build across that. I think companies need to step forward and demonstrate their commitment to making contributions to the Cali Fund. And at the same time, I think countries need to step forward and demonstrate their commitment to avoid that obligation stacking so that you don't have to pay that 0.6% through national measures and the 1% through the multilateral mechanism as well. And this is what I think we've heard from several people. Some kind of coalition, some kind of declaration which says we will not have that stacking of obligations. We will not have those bilateral and multilateral processes in place for the use of DSI on genetic resources. And to give the assurances to countries that they can step away from national measures, companies need to step forward at that same moment and say, we're ready to contribute, we're ready to commit to the multilateral mechanism. So I think in answer to your question, it's both, and it's both at the same time. And we don't want to get into a kind of a situation that we're in some kind of like standoff, just waiting for the other to go, because we might be standing for a long time. So let's try and move together.
Can I?
Thank you. Hey, Charlotte, yes, please.
Yeah, it's just, I hope it also became clear from this webinar that there are reasons why the companies are not incentivized. So first movers, as things are now, is something very different from saying that we don't support the mechanism. I mean, that the multilateral mechanism as such, but there are fundamental things now that speaks against the decision at COP15 and so on, both the legal certainty and the not hindering research and innovation and so on. So it's not because we don't want it, it's because there are things that are not in place. So, but we need to continue to speak about it, and it's now, I agree, that we need to do that because we know how long it takes between countries and between companies to get aligned on this. So let's keep doing that, and that there is, as far as I know, not a formal process for that. Conversation on changing the modalities. There are the studies and the inclusion of new modalities and so on, but not to actually work on what is in there now. And that is what I think we need. It's a multilateral mechanism. If all countries are not on board and agreeing and so on, it's not really multilateral. So
thank you.
But and I also recognize it cannot be perfect from the beginning, but there are some fundamental things that was very clear before COP16, but that was not ended to be part of the final decision, and that needs further work.
Thank you. So I then have a question, and maybe I don't know if you would answer that, but maybe some of the other panelists can respond to that. So where do we carry this conversation forward? I mean, I agree with you, and one of the reasons we're having this webinar is exactly so that everyone have an opportunity to make their points, can understand the industry perspective on it, can reflect on how to address those concerns and handle them and work around them. I don't think that that waiting until COP17 is going to get us very much further. So is there some way for us to make progress before we get to COP17? And if so, then where do we make that progress? And Katie, you talked about national consultations with industry. Both of the industry representatives have indicated a willingness on the part of industry to contribute. The process is underway. Birgit's also talked about roundtables and the urgency. Does anyone have any idea about how we take this forward? In what forum? Maybe I should ask the learned friend, Sapriya. Where do we take this forward?
I think what Katie has said and Birgit has said are the ways forward, pretty much engage with the industry and come together and, move forward from there. And, like everyone has been saying, we can't wait until COP17. We have to start moving and start seeing some funds come in. So I think, although it's not a perfect solution, perfect mechanism yet, and there is room for improvement, but it's also a starting point. And we need to start seeing funds coming in for us to also have, for all of us to have the motivation to make sure all the issues that are there are currently sorted out in the next 2 COPs. And, it becomes a much better mechanism by then. But contributions will have to start flowing and so on. So, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone else want a final word before I give the floor to Carter for the final word on the whole webinar?
Not that I insist on having the final word, but again, I feel bad for always going back after Cypria, like I'm commenting only on what she's saying. Yeah, I agree that, we need to talk, and but again, the expectation that money will have to start going in without knowing that some fundamental issues are not there, are not fixed, is very hard to manage. I think we should maybe, like a wild thought, really talk about prioritization. So what needs to happen first, but then make that kind of roadmap, like a plan. How do we all envision, that evolution of our conversation towards, the improvement of the fund, so that ultimately it works as planned. But expecting that it will work immediately just because we need to start something, is not really very realistic. Again, proper planning and timing would be maybe a better approach. Thank you. Now, Pierre, sorry, I don't want to be the last on the conversation.
Thank you. I think we all need to, I think we can all agree that unless it works for everyone, it's not going to work very well. But it can't be held hostage either by one group of stakeholders, whichever that group is. Not implying it is industry, but there are some questions to answer. At that, thank you very, very much for your participation in this panel. Really appreciate the insights and the thoughts and the frank exchange of views, as they say in diplomatic language. And I want to turn over to Carter from Norway, who is going to use Hansen with 2 S's, who will have the final word and the closing remarks. Carter, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Pierre. So there, participants, as we draw this very rich webinar to a close, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the speakers, panelists, and participants for their valuable contributions and active engagement. So in closing, I want to go back to the reason why we are here, because the status for biodiversity is critical, and biodiversity protection is a responsibility we all have. And as Jasmina just said, if whether we are building a raft or an airplane, I must say I'm agnostic, but regardless, we have to hit the ground running. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carter. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And have a good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. I'm sure we'll continue this conversation, and there will be many more iterations. Go well.